Abstentions? California votes aye.
On this vote, the ayes are 269, the nays are 161. The bill is passed, and without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Does the gentleman from Utah rise? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chairman, we don't very often get these opportunities. The kids who are at the back you can't see because you're standing in front of them. It's the first time that we've ever had pages here not in two small groups, but one summer group. These pages are going home this week, and they have had a chance of being here to see history in the making on several different fronts. I wish you'd give them. Before you do that, the page board consists of Representative Fox, North Carolina, myself, Representative Jejett, Representative KILDEE. I yield to the gentlelady from Colorado.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. I want to thank all of the wonderful pages who are in the back of the room. You have really seen history the last 6 weeks in this Congress, and we're so honored and proud to have all of you here with us. And I'm sure this may not be my place, but we all want to welcome back our wonderful colleague, Congresswoman Giffords, here. And with that, I yield back.
Chairman. Chairman, I also yield to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. KILDEE.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to express my personal gratitude to all the pages for what they have done here in the 112th Congress. To become a page, Mr. Speaker, these young people have proven themselves to be academically qualified. As we all know, the job of a congressional page is not an easy one. Along with being away from home, the pages must possess the maturity to balance competing demands for their time and their energy. You pages have witnessed the House debate issues of war and peace, hunger and poverty, justice and civil rights. You have lived through history. And before yielding, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the members of the House Page Board who provided such fantastic service to this institution. The Chairman, Congressman Rob Bishop, the Vice Chairman, Congresswoman Diana DeGette, Congresswoman Virginia Fox, Clerk of the House Karen Haas, Sergeant at Arms Bill Livingood, and Mrs. Lynn Silversmith Klein. I want to thank them for their service on the House Page Board, and I thank the departing pages, and you've seen a wonderful bit of history take place today.
Claiming the time, Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to include the Page Summer Class in the official record, and I ask this body to please recognize the pages for the service they have rendered us this year. Speaker, I yield back.
Without objection, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Pelosi, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I, too, want to join our colleagues in recognizing the contribution of the pages to the conduct of the House of Representatives. I thank them, and they have, as Mr. KILDEE said and others have mentioned, borne witness to many important historical occasions here. But I can't think of any that is more special and means so much to our country than to witness the return of our colleague who is the personification of courage, of sincerity, of admiration throughout the country. Congresswoman Gabby Giffords brings us Her presence today to make sure that we honor the obligations of our great country is important and symbolic. Her presence here in the chamber, as well as her service throughout her entire service in Congress, brings honor to this chamber. We are all privileged to call her colleague, some of us very privileged to call her friend. Throughout America, there isn't a name that stirs more love, more admiration, more respect, more wishing for our daughters to be like her than the name of Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. Thank you, Gabby, for joining us today. Yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a concurrent resolution and ask unanimous consent for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the concurrent resolution.
House Concurrent Resolution 70, resolved that in the enrollment of Senate 365, the Secretary of the Senate shall amend the title so as to read, a bill to provide for budget control.
Is there objection to the consideration of the concurrent resolution? Without objection, the concurrent resolution is agreed to, and the motion reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is a vote on the motion of the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2480 as amended, on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 100, H.R. 2480, a bill to amend Title V United States Code to authorize appropriations for the Administrative Conference of the United States for fiscal years 2012, 2013, and 2014, and for other purposes.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
The House passes the debt ceiling bill by a vote of 269 to 161. One of those voting in favor was Arizona Representative Gabrielle Giffords, and it probably was one of the worst kept or the best kept secrets in Washington because there was not any word or indication of her coming to the House floor until a tweet or two moments before she appeared on the floor, and you heard applause and you saw her there on the floor. She or her office just tweeted out a few minutes ago, "The Capitol looks beautiful and I am honored to be at work tonight." A tweet from Gabrielle Giffords' office. 15-minute vote. This will be the last vote on the suspension bill debated the other night in the House, and then they are done for the month of August for their recess. But the work on the budget bill, on the debt ceiling bill rather, is still ahead in the Senate. We spoke to a Capitol Hill reporter a short while ago to get the preview of what's ahead. Dan Friedman of National Journal is covering the debt debate up on Capitol Hill. Is there any doubt about the eventual outcome here in the House this evening?
Not much doubt. I wouldn't say there's no doubt whatsoever, but everyone seems pretty confident that this will go through with a lot of Republican votes and enough Democratic votes to ensure that it passes the House.
On the House side, are there any key members to watch how they vote?
I am not sure. I think everyone has been, there's always a good amount of members who are on the fence, but I don't think there's anyone whose vote is going to make or break this. I think it's going to go through with some votes to spare.
Assuming that it does pass the House tonight, how quickly will the Senate get to work on it?
It sounds likely the Senate won't vote tonight, although there's still some talk about that possibility, but that they would rather vote tomorrow. They haven't said exactly what time. They've said they believe they have until the end of the day on August 2nd, tomorrow, to get this done. So they would be sending it to the President at some point tomorrow, I would guess earlier in the day.
So as you see, the debate in the Senate could begin tonight, but no vote until tomorrow?
Yep, and they're going to need a unanimous consent agreement. All senators are going to have to agree to allow the vote to be tomorrow, so it would be likely that Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid would execute that unanimous consent agreement tomorrow, or tonight, excuse me.
Have you heard any indication that some Republicans may object, or Democrats or the independents may object to that unanimous consent?
it sounds like, maybe surprisingly to some people, that no, they will not object. Even the opponents of this bill have said basically they're satisfied as long as there's a 60-vote threshold, which there will be. And some of them had asked for a day to review the bill, so they've gotten that now if the vote is tomorrow.
Dan Friedman with National Journal covering the debate. Thanks for that update.
Thanks for having me.
And just to recap, that bill passed the House by a vote of 269 to 161. Unofficially, there were 95 Democrats who voted aye, 66 Republicans who voted against the bill. So the action, as you heard, goes to the Senate next. Last vote in the series and probably of the House until as they now go into their August recess following this evening.
On this vote, the yeas are 382, the nays are 23, two-thirds being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent request. I request unanimous consent to place into the record. I was absent earlier today due to a prior commitment scheduled before we knew the House would be in session on the votes I missed. On H.R. 2715 to provide greater authority and discretion to CPSC in enforcement of product safety laws, had I been present, I'd voted yes. On H.R. 398 to amend the Immigration Nationality Act to toll during national and active duty services abroad and armed forces, I would have voted yes. On H.R. 1933 to amend the Immigration Nationality Act to modify requirements, I would have voted yes. While I do recognize the shortage of nurses in our country, I would hope that we should focus on providing more incentives to students here to become nurses. On the motion ordering the previous question on Rule S-365, I would have voted no. On H.R. 384, the rule providing for consideration of S-365, I would have voted no. On the journal vote, I would have voted yes, and I ask unanimous consent that this statement be placed in the record.
Without objection, the gentleman's statement will appear in the record.
Thank you.
Pursuant to 22 United States Code 6913 and the order of the House of January 5, 2011, the Chair announces the Speaker's appointment of the following member of the House to the Congressional Executive Commission on the People's Republic of China. Mr. Smith, New Jersey, Chairman.
Mr. Smith of New Jersey, Chairman.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Without objection, so ordered. The Chair at this time will recognize for special order speeches without prejudice to the possibility of further legislative business. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Request permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Permission granted.
Mr. Speaker, this was a good day. And one of the reasons it's a good day is because Gabby Giffords is back. Mr. Speaker, she is one of the best things in this Congress. To me, she came back tonight, cast her vote, the first vote since she was attacked, and she is a perfect example of bipartisanship. I've had the privilege to work with her on the issue of border security. And while she was in the hospital recovering in my hometown of Houston, Texas, her staff in Arizona hosted me so I could go down to the border and see firsthand the problems of border security in Arizona. And I think she is a model for the attitude that we should all have, because she is tenacious and she is relentless in her love for America and her desire to do what's right and represent the people in Arizona that elected her here. So welcome back, Gabby Giffords. You were missed, and we're glad you're back. And that's just the way it is.
Are there further requests for 1-minute speeches? For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise? Consent granted. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, a group of members sent a letter to President Obama urging him to grant clemency at this point and commute the sentence for Jonathan Pollard. Jonathan Pollard spied on the United States on behalf of Israel. He should not have done that, and he was punished. But the punishment for that espionage has gone on longer than anything comparable. I believe that there is a personal argument for the clemency. And there is also the fact that American-Israeli relations are always important and are particularly important now. We are asking the Israelis to take some steps towards a negotiated peace. They may or may not be possible for them to take. Knowing that America recognizes the strength of that friendship is a very important factor in our persuading them of that. And I believe that in addition to the arguments based on the excessive length of the sentence, I think, the fact that Mr. Pollard has served for so long, that a clearly deterrent effect is there. We're not asking that he be pardoned. We're not condoning his crime. We are saying that in addition to the personal argument, it would be a sign of U.S.-Israeli relations that I think would help strengthen the climate for peace. And I will be submitting the copy of the letter that we sent to the President for inclusion.
The gentleman's time has expired. Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Franks, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Majority Leader. The gentleman is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to take this moment to just thank God that Gabby Giffords has returned to this floor. You know, it so happens that just a few feet from here was the last time I'd seen Gabby when she left the floor prior to this tragic accident, or this tragic attack on her. And it just occurs to me that once in a while in this life we find an example where tragedy is transcended by the human spirit and triumph and the grace of God. And this is one of those days, and I just congratulate her with everything in me that she has come back, and she has the prayers of the entire delegation, and I know the entire Congress, as she goes forward to complete recovery. And we are all very, very grateful today. This is a wonderful celebration for every member of this Congress. It's a celebration for just the cause of this republic, because we believe that everyone has the right to have the freedom of speech and to peaceably assemble, and this is what she was doing when she was attacked. And for her to come back this way as she has is a triumph of the first magnitude, and we are also very, very proud of her and welcome her back with all of our hearts. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have another subject tonight that I want to talk about, and that is the recent challenges that we have faced over the debt limit raising and the effort on the part of many of us to place a balanced budget into the bill that went across to the Senate that would have required a balanced budget to be in our Constitution. Because, Mr. Speaker, some of us believe that it is the only way that we are going to finally in this country deal with the challenges of deficit spending and with the burgeoning debt that threatens to crush this country in a way that no military power has ever been able to do. Mr. Speaker, some of us have talked about this difficult problem for a very long time, and it seems that over and over again history repeats itself, and we never really deal with it like we should. But this time, Mr. Speaker, we have placed something before the American people that I think that they are going to hang on to, and I believe that there's great hope in the coming months that we will continue to strive for this balanced budget amendment, and I hope that the people of America are paying attention, because we cannot repeal the laws of mathematics. This challenge will damage this country in the most profound way if we don't deal with it while we can. But, Mr. Speaker, let me just say this, that all financial budgets will eventually balance. That's a fact. No individual, no family, no business, and no government can indefinitely continue to spend more money than they take in without someone having to make up the difference, Mr. Speaker, and that includes the budget of the United States government. Neither Mr. Obama nor congressional Democrats can repeal this law of mathematics. The federal budget of the United States government will eventually balance, as all of them do, either whether it's a person or a government or a business. when they continue to spend money that they don't have. Someone, sooner or later, has to make up the difference. The question with our federal budget is whether the White House and those of us in this body will balance this budget ourselves by wise policy, or national bankruptcy and financial ruin will do it for us. From the day Barack Obama walked into the White House, he has, with breathtaking arrogance, Mr. Speaker, absolutely ignored economic and financial reality. It took America the first 216 years of its existence to accumulate the debt that Barack Obama has accumulated in the short 2.5-year span of his presidency. During this short time in office, he has increased our federal debt by nearly $4 trillion, Mr. Speaker. And just to put that nearly $4 trillion in new debt in perspective, let me just put it this way. If all of a sudden a wave of responsibility swept through this chamber and we stopped all deficit spending and began to pay installments of $1 million per day to pay down the nearly $4 trillion debt that Barack Obama has created in just 2.5 years, it would take us more than 10,000 years to pay off just Mr. Obama's accumulated debt in 2.5 years. It would take us more than 10,000 years, Mr. Speaker, to do that if we paid it off at $1 million a day. And that's if we don't have to pay one dime in interest in the process. But you see, Mr. Speaker, we are not paying Mr. Obama's debt down at $1 million per day. We are going deeper into debt, more than 4,000 times that much every day. And that's under Mr. Obama's own submitted budget and deficit projections. And then when speaking of the effort to reduce the deficit, the President has the hubris to tell conservative Republicans to take a balanced approach and to eat our peas. Well, Mr. Speaker, if there's anything more catastrophically out of balance than our federal budget, it is the arrogance to competency ratio of this White House. We have watched as President Obama ran up $1 trillion deficit for the first time in history, and then break that record the very next year, and then say that we would have, according to his own projections, $1 trillion plus deficit for, quote, years to come. We have watched as the Obama administration promised that if we would just allow them to spend $800 million on their stimulus package, the economy would rebound and unemployment would never reach 8%. Well, of course, that didn't happen. And then we've watched this administration bring us Obamacare, or the health care takeover by government. And, Mr. Speaker, let me just suggest to you that at the time of that debate, there was a lot of discussion over what private employers would do to their own insurance plans in the face of this government takeover of health care. And some people thought, well, 5%, maybe 10% of the health care plan in the private sector would be dropped by corporations, would be dropped by employers. But, Mr. Speaker, that projection's a little bit further off than we thought. The polled people that have asked the question, have answered the question of whether or not they would drop their health care plans being employers, they have said that as many as half of them would do that now. And, Mr. Speaker, the reason I mention that is because if that's true, the cost of doing that, the cost of absorbing that to the federal government will be another $2 trillion on top of the $1 trillion that was already in the bill. So Obamacare itself could cost us $3 trillion. And, Mr. Speaker, that's just in the next 10 years. So I would just say to you, Mr. Speaker, this administration has really done for deficits and debt what Stonehenge did for rocks. There is no one that has more pressed this deficit spending than the Obama administration. But, Mr. Speaker, the people have awakened, and they are tired of Mr. Obama telling them that 2 + 2 = 13. So as we now find ourselves raising this debt ceiling yet again, in the process, some of us as conservative Republicans wanted so badly to give the American people and the states of this nation the historic opportunity to adopt a balanced budget amendment to our Constitution to put this country back on the track of fiscal sanity once again. So we placed a balanced budget amendment requirement in 2 separate pieces of legislation and passed them through this body and sent them over to the Senate, only to have Mr. Obama and Senate Democrats refused to even allow them to come up for a vote. Either one of them, they simply refused to vote on them. In both instances, Mr. Speaker, President Obama's contributions to the process were threats to veto both plans sight unseen. Mr. Speaker, I wish I could just get this one question answered. If nothing else that they would answer, I just wish the administration would answer this one question. What is it that the President and Democrats find so radical about a balanced budget amendment? This is something that 49 states have and every family in America has to have sooner or later. A simple balanced budget amendment that says we cannot go into the debt in an infinite way that threatens not only our children's future. You know, we used to talk about how this threatened our children's future, Mr. Speaker, and I will tell you, being the father of two little twins that are going to have their third birthday before long, that has great pull in my soul, that I don't want to see this crushing debt placed on their shoulders. But I would say to you, Mr. Speaker, that now we are starting to face a challenge that is going to come in this generation, in this time, and it may not be so far off. Greece has set an example for the world as to what can happen when people simply don't pay attention to their fiscal challenges. But the failure of both the failure and the cooperation and the failure of leadership from Democrats on this issue has been baffling to me, Mr. Speaker. Unbelievably, it has been 822 days since Senate Democrats proposed, not passed, but merely even proposed a budget. An individual practicing such irresponsibility, living without a budget while paying for everything with borrowed money, would meet certain financial ruin. Why do we believe our nation will fare any better under the same preposterous policy? And now Mr. Obama and the Democrats have falsely said that the balanced budget amendment is a Republican plan to destroy Social Security and Medicare. What a false, terrible, despicable thing to say. The truth is, the balanced budget amendment is the only honest chance of reforming and saving those programs in our country from bankruptcy and economic failure in the future, Mr. Speaker. And throughout this process, Mr. Obama and the liberal media have sought to force tax increases upon the people and job creators of this nation by suggesting that Republicans were not willing to address the revenue side of this equation. But that isn't true either, Mr. Speaker. Just because Republicans are not willing to increase job-killing tax rates in this country doesn't mean we don't understand the revenue side of this equation. We just know that increasing the rate of taxes will decrease the productivity of this nation, and we will ultimately decrease the revenue that comes into this government. It is the economic equivalent of putting dirt in ice cream. It is a disastrous recipe to embrace in the name of balance. But I hear it over and over again, balance, balance. There's nothing more balanced, Mr. Speaker, than a balanced budget amendment to our Constitution. History and experience has demonstrated time and again that the best way to increase the amount of revenue coming into this government is to get out of the way and let the people and the private sector increase the number of quality jobs for the American people. This has always resulted in the increased productivity and the broadening of the tax base in this amazing nation. Mr. Speaker, we don't need higher taxes. We need more jobs and more taxpayers. Mr. Obama and the Democrats have constantly said that we need to take, again, this, quote, balanced approach, which is a code for increased taxes. But, Mr. Speaker, again, the truly balanced approach to this problem is a balanced budget to the Constitution. And by passing a balanced budget amendment, we can restore hope and confidence in capital markets inside the United States and all over the world, because they will see that in the long run, that America is going to make it. It may take the states 6 or 7 years to fully ratify this constitutional amendment to balance the budget, but we owe it to the states and to the people to give them this chance to save their nation. And in the meantime, we can work here to expand this economy and balance this budget so when the amendment finally is ratified, we will all be ready to go forward as a nation to embrace greater days than we've ever seen. And we have a rare opportunity, Mr. Speaker, that may never come again, of doing something truly historic that will save this nation and its people from economic ruin. This battle is not over, the American people are beginning to realize that they are already paying a very high price for electing Barack Obama to the presidency. If they make the profound error of re-electing him in the next election, our families and all Americans will face economic, constitutional, and a national security crisis that will dwarf the challenges that we face in these moments. And if Democrats and the President are not willing to give the people this chance by helping Republicans pass a balanced budget amendment in the Congress, the resulting consequences will be theirs alone, Mr. Speaker, and I believe the people will hold them accountable for whatever financial disaster may follow. Now, long ago, Mr. Speaker, Thomas Jefferson said, and I will quote him, he said, "I wish it were possible to obtain a single amendment to our Constitution. I would be willing to depend upon that alone for the reduction of the administration of our government to the genuine principles of its Constitution. I mean an additional article from the taking from the federal government the power of borrowing," unquote. He said that right after the Constitution itself had been finished. He just wanted one more amendment. And unfortunately, as you know, he turned out to be right, but his contemporaries failed to listen to him about the balanced budget amendment. I would just say to you, Mr. Speaker, it is not too late for those of us in these moments to listen to his words. I believe the American people are listening today, and I believe that they call upon their leaders now to do something truly historic and pass a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution in the days ahead. And God help us to do it, Mr. Speaker. And with that, I would like to yield to the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King. And he may have stepped off the floor briefly, Mr. Speaker. Let me just say, Mr. Speaker, that I know that this has been a challenging week, and I believe our leadership on the Republican side of this House has done everything possible to try to work with the President and to work with the Majority Leader of the U.S. Senate, and they've had an extremely significant challenge. And we sent twice to the other body bills that would have raised the debt limit, but in the process also have required a balanced budget amendment to be inserted into the Constitution, or at least sent to the people so that they could decide. But this is the one thing that they took from us in the process. And, Mr. Speaker, I truly believe that we had a golden opportunity to truly change the way that America goes forward, and we failed that opportunity. But I will also say that I think that there's still hope to do it in the next few months. We have part of the equation that we have under this legislation is to require a balanced budget amendment vote in both this chamber in the House of Representatives and in the U.S. Senate. And I hope so much that we do that while we can, and that the people of this country will let their representatives and senators know that they are tired of this deficit spending and tired of this fiscal irresponsibility, and saying, in our lifetime, we will have a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, and we will make it sure that our children can walk in the light of freedom and economic hope as we have. And I hope that happens, Mr. Speaker. And with that, I would yield to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Price.
Thank you so much to my good friend for yielding and for taking time on this truly historic day to highlight what
the gentleman will suspend. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Price, will be recognized for the remainder of the hour.
Oh, no. Oh, no, 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 no. Oh, no, no, no.
Gentleman is recognized.
I'm just yielding to the gentleman.
I'd be happy to take the rest of the hour, but my good friend Mr. Franks is going to be controlling that.
For such time as he may consume. I yield to the gentleman.
The gentleman from Arizona will control the time.
Thank you so much. And I just want to commend my friend for taking time this evening on what truly is an historic day, an opportunity for this nation to begin, just begin, to move things in the right direction from a fiscal standpoint here in our great country. The debate over the last 3 to 4 months has been very loud. Sometimes it's been acrimonious. There are many people across this great country who just are confounded by the laborious nature with which it takes to make any changes here in Washington at all. And I share that frustration and share that anger and share that concern, because we've been moving in the wrong direction for a long, long time as it relates to spending at the federal level. And so what we, as the gentleman from Arizona so appropriately said, was what we need to do is decrease spending in the short term. We need to put some controls on spending in the midterm. But in the long term, as we have discovered and as the American people know so well, it's going to take structural, fundamental change of the way that Washington does business in order to get our fiscal house in order and get us on that path to a balanced budget and to paying off our debt. And the best way that I believe that can occur is through a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And I don't say that lightly, understanding that there have been really very few times in which the Constitution has been amended. But I believe now in my fourth term that having recognized early on in my congressional career that all of the inertia here in Washington is to spend money. Everything. It all points towards spending money. The budget process that we go through, the folks through the Congressional Budget Office that try their best to do the work, but the rules under which they determine whether or not something costs the federal government and this nation something or whether it saves are so distorted that you can't get to the right answer. One cannot get to the right answer without structural change. And that's where the balanced budget amendment comes in. And so today, what we did in the Budget Control Act is not all that any of us would have liked. In fact, the numbers are relatively paltry when you look at them compared to how much money this government spends. But what is true about this act is that it will allow us in this House of Representatives and in the Senate right down the hallway to say to the American people, we hear you, we want this government to be held accountable, and the best way to do that is by passing a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And so my friend from Arizona comes down this evening to highlight that wonderful change that we have the prospect for making in this Congress. This isn't 4 years down the road, 5 years down the road. This is in this Congress right now. And I know that if he could, he would urge the folks listening to this and members of Congress to encourage all of their constituents and all the people across this land who so firmly believe, as I do and as I know Mr. Franks does, that we need to put some controls, significant controls on how Washington spends money, and that the balanced budget amendment is the best way to do that. I know that what you would do, what he would do, is to urge all members to communicate to their constituents and to every single American to call their representatives, to call their United States senators and say, sometime, because of the bill that we just passed, sometime between October 1st of this year and December 31st of this year, every single American will have the opportunity to communicate to their representative and their United States senator the urging that they would encourage them to support a balanced budget amendment. That's when this vote is going to occur. Not going to occur tomorrow, not going to occur in the month of August or September, but what the bill provides is for the wonderful enthusiasm and the heartfelt patriotism and concern that the American people feel about this great country. Now is the time to communicate to their representatives to support a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution of the United States. If we're able to get this to happen, if we're able to make this become an amendment to the Constitution, then frankly, the problem itself will begin to take care of itself, because the rules will begin to say we cannot spend more than we take in, just like every family in this country does and every business in this country must do. And that is to say we cannot spend more than we take in. So I just had to come down and commend my good friend from Arizona for, in a time when there's a lot of calamity around this town, to take the time to say this must be highlighted on this day, because this is the beginning of the next 61 days that the American people must act to let their representatives know support a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. And I yield back to my good friend.
Well, I thank the gentleman so much. You know, as it happens, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Price is the chairman of our policy committee, and no one has written more cogently and with more commitment on the balanced budget amendment than this man in our House, and I'm so grateful that he's here and that he has been such a voice for this. And I would just ask the gentleman to yield for a question for a moment. Do you think the American people know that we passed 2 pieces of legislation over to the Senate with requirements for a balanced budget amendment, and the first thing they did, that the Democrat leader there just took those out or just simply refused to vote on them? Do you think they know that?
If my friend will yield.
Yes, certainly.
I don't believe so, because I think if the American people knew that, then they would be loudly protesting the lack of leadership and the responsibility that the Senate has taken its job. And that's the importance of this vote today, because the majority leader in the United States Senate cannot turn this vote away. This vote will happen. It'll happen sometime between October 1st and December 31st of this year. Not next year, not 2013, not 2014, this year. We have the opportunity to be able to send to the states a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution in this calendar year, and I'm so proud of the work that the gentleman from Arizona has done and our colleagues have done to highlight this issue, to ensure that it was included in this piece of legislation, and look forward to a very positive vote come October, November, or December of this year. But it won't happen without the engagement of the American people, and I yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman so much, and let me yield to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Duncan, here, and I'm glad that you came to the floor, sir.
Yeah. I want to thank my colleague from Arizona for taking on this very important issue, and what a great evening to talk about America living within its means. You know, we are $14.3 trillion in debt. We're spending $1.5 trillion more than we're bringing in as a nation. And the piece of legislation that we passed this evening that's now residing over in the Senate includes what I think is the most important language within that legislation, and that is a vote on a balanced budget amendment. You know, I was a small business owner for 16 years, and when I did my budget every year, I had to think about what my revenues were for the past year and what my revenues were going to be for the coming year, and I had to set a budget based on that. I couldn't just hope there was a money tree out in the backyard and I continue spending money that I didn't have. You know, the Americans have been engaged in this process of the debt ceiling debate, and we're urging them to get involved in this process of a balanced budget amendment. You know, once that requirement and that amendment does pass both the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, it will be sent to the states to be ratified. And at that point in time, Americans from all across the land will be able to rally their state legislatures, their general assemblies, to take up and ratify this important amendment to the United States Constitution. And many of my constituents, the gentleman from Arizona doesn't know this, many of my constituents know that I carry a United States Constitution with me in my pocket. In fact, I read from that very podium in the well on the second day as a member of this 112th Congress, I read from the United States Constitution. Something I don't take lightly, but in order for this government to survive and survive fiscally is to get our fiscal house in order. And the secret to doing that is really to pass a balanced budget amendment, to require Washington to live within its means the way that families and small businesses and large businesses have to do all across this great land. You know, when I was a small business owner, occasionally I had to go borrow money. But I had to put a plan together for that banker on how I was going to pay that back. Hopefully we've begun to do that through this week of debate. But a balanced budget amendment, a requirement for the United States government to balance its checkbook. The most, I guess, simplest thing that American families and small businesses do is sit down with that checkbook register and make sure that they haven't spent too much money, to make sure that they live within their means. So we've got that opportunity. I'm proud that this was included. I'm proud that I stand with 87 members of our freshman class that really helped, I think, leadership see that this was a vital component for this piece of legislation. I commend the House leadership for including it. I commend the House leadership for making sure that its inclusion in this bill that we sent over to the Senate this evening was there. And so I want to urge the American people to get behind this, to contact your senators, contact your House members. As we heard recently from the gentleman from the Atlanta area of Georgia say, this vote will take place sometime between October and the end of the year. And so during that process and leading up to that process, contact your senators, contact your House members and say, government should have to live the way I operate my household, the way my wife and I have to sit down at our kitchen table and balance our budget. Balance Washington's budget. Let's get our spending under control. The time is now. I brought my little boy, he's 10 years old, he's sitting on the House floor with me today because I teach them, my children, the value of not spending more than you bring in. And they say, Dad, can we have that baseball or can we have that item? And I say, son, we don't have the money in our budget this week or this month to purchase that. But let me make plans so that we can purchase that in the future. We live within our means. Am I perfect? No, I have debt, but we have a plan to pay back that debt. The future of our children and our grandchildren is at stake, and America knows. America got engaged in this. They got engaged in the last election cycle, and they know that Washington cannot keep spending more than it has. So I want to commend my colleague from Arizona for taking on this very, very important issue to make Washington live within its means. To live within its means, not to spend money that it doesn't have. Let's rein in our fiscal house. Let's get our house in order, and let's create a way to start paying back that enormous debt. We can do that with a balanced budget amendment. So again, thank you, gentleman from Arizona, and I'll yield back.
And I certainly thank the gentleman very much. And now I understand that the gentleman
Will
from
the gentleman
Illinois...
suspend, please? Members are reminded to address the remarks to the chair and to not refer to guests on the floor of the House. Gentleman from Arizona may resume.
I thank the Speaker, and now I understand that the gentleman from Illinois would like for me to yield for a question.
I would like to yield to the gentleman for a question.